Hello everyone and welcome back to our channel. What if a simple drink at a bar suddenly turned into a moment of suspicion, fear, and a confrontation years in the making? Because in generosity, even the smallest interaction can uncover secrets that refuse to stay buried. One restless evening, Will Abbott walked into a bar hoping for nothing more than a quiet moment to clear his mind. The day had already pushed him to his limits, and he carried the kind of restless energy that comes from trying to outrun your own thoughts. But generosity has a funny way of refusing to give anyone peace for long. Just moments after arriving, Will spotted someone he hadn't expected to see. Dylan McAvoy. The two men shared a complicated past, one filled with unresolved tension and history neither of them had truly escaped. What began as a casual, almost polite conversation slowly turned into something darker when Will suddenly began to feel strange after drinking from his glass. His mind grew foggy, his body felt heavy, and the person he suspected was the very man sitting next to him. What followed was a tense confrontation, a rush outside into the cool night air, and the moment where years of mistrust and old wounds came crashing back to the surface. The evening began with Will arriving late, which by now had almost become a habit. He walked into the bar carrying the kind of distracted energy that suggested his mind was somewhere else entirely. The bartender recognized him immediately and reached for his usual drink without even asking. But Will wasn't paying much attention to that. Instead, his eyes slowly scanned the room. In generosity, coincidence rarely felt like coincidence, and something in his instincts told him to stay all right. That's when he saw Dylan, standing at the far end of the bar. Dylan McAvoy looked relaxed at first glance, leaning casually against the counter, but there was something different about him. He looked heavier somehow, not physically, but emotionally, like life had pressed down on him harder than expected. Dylan lifted his drink and took a slow sip before glancing across the room. For a brief moment, their eyes met. The air between them changed instantly. Neither man spoke right away, but something passed silently between them, a reminder of shared history, unfinished business, and the kind of past that never completely fades. Eventually, Will walked over and slid onto a bar stool. He rubbed his temple, clearly exhausted, and told the bartender to bring him something quick. A glass soon appeared in front of him, the amber liquid catching the dim lights over the bar. Will wrapped his fingers around the glass, grounding himself, but he didn't drink immediately. In generosity, hesitation wasn't weakness. Sometimes it was survival. Dylan approached a moment later, wearing a polite smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I didn't expect to see you here, he said in a calm voice. Will let you out a short breath and replied that the feeling was mutual. The tension between them was subtle but unmistakable. They were trying to behave like two normal acquaintances catching up, but the past refused to stay quiet. Dylan gestured toward the empty stool beside Will and asked if he could sit. Will shrugged casually and told him it was a free country. Once Dylan sat down, he leaned closer and studied Will for a moment before bluntly telling him he looked terrible. Will answered with dry sarcasm, returning the greeting and asking what had brought Dylan back to town. Dylan's jaw tightened slightly before he gave a simple answer: family. That single word hung in the air longer than expected. In generosity, family wasn't always comforting. Sometimes it was complicated enough to reopen old wounds. The bartender returned with another drink for Dylan, and the conversation slowly shifted into safer territory. They walked about the weather, work, and mutual acquaintances they both pretended not to care about anymore. Despite everything, the conversation flowed surprisingly easily. The familiarity between them hadn't completely disappeared, At one point, they even laughed. But Will noticed something small, something subtle. Dylan's hand lounged near Will's drink just a little longer than necessary. It was such a tiny detail that most people would never notice it. But Will had learned long ago to pay attention when his guard was up. A little while later, Dylan excused himself and said he needed to take a call. He stepped away from the bar and moved through the crowd toward the patio doors. Will watched him go. Then he looked down at his drink. Everything about it looked normal. It smelled the same. Nothing appeared out of place. Still, something felt wrong. He lifted the glass slowly and took a cautious sip. The taste was similar, familiar. The usual burn of alcohol. Trying to dismiss his own paranoia, Will took a larger sip. That's when things started to change. The world around him seemed to grow quieter, as if someone had slowly turned down the volume. His thoughts became sluggish. His arms felt strangely heavy, like they were moving through water. Will blinked hard and grabbed the edge of the bar to steady himself. Just then, Dylan returned. He immediately noticed something was wrong and asked if Will was okay. The concern in his voice came almost too quickly. Will tried to answer normally, but his words came out slow and thick. He blamed exhaustion, though even he didn't believe it. The room tilted slightly, making his stomach tighten with fear. Dylan placed a steady hand on his shoulder to support him. The touch triggered something in Will, not comfort, alarm. Will looked up sharply and asked a question that had been building his mind. Had Dylan tampered with his drink? The words hung between them like a loaded weapon. For a split second, Dylan froze. Then disbelief crossed his face as he insisted he had done nothing. Will wasn't convinced. He pointed out that Dylan had touched the drink earlier. Dylan dismissed the accusation, insisting Will was imagining things, but Will demanded to know why he felt so strange. Seeing people nearby beginning to stare, Dylan suggested they step outside for fresh air. Will wanted to refuse. He wanted to demand answers right there in front of everyone, but his body betrayed him. He leaned against Dylan for support as they stepped out onto the patio. The cool night air hit his face like a shock. A light rain had started falling, bringing the sharp smell of wet pavement and electricity in the air. Dylan guided him into a chair and crouched down in front of him. Look at me, he said quietly. Will stared at him, fear and anger battling behind his eyes. He demanded honesty. Dylan insisted he had never touched the drink. Will laughed bitterly, pointing out that in Genoa City, strange situations rarely had innocent explanations. The rain began to fall harder as silence stretched between them. Finally, Dylan asked a simple question. Had Will eaten anything that day? Will opened his mouth, then stopped. He couldn't remember. The day had been filled with meetings, arguments, and too much coffee instead of actual meals. Dylan sighed. He explained that drinking alcohol on an empty stomach, combined with stress and exhaustion, could easily cause the symptoms Will was experiencing. Just then, the bartender brought out a glass of water. Will drank slowly. Gradually, the fog lifted, his heartbeat slowed, the spinning sensation faded, and in its place came embarrassment. He quietly apologized for accusing Dylan. Dylan studied him for a moment before shrugging. Considering their complicated past, he said he understood why Will reacted that way. Will looked up and asked if he truly meant that. Dylan met his gaze and confirmed that he did. They sat there for a moment as the rain continued falling around them. Inside the bar, life had already moved on. Conversation resumed, laughter returned, and the brief drama outside was already turning into gossip. By morning, the story would spread across Genoa City in a dozen different versions, and none of them would be entirely true. Eventually, Will stood, now steady on his feet again, but before leaving, he made one thing clear. Just because the crisis had passed didn't mean everything between them was suddenly resolved. Dylan nodded calmly. He wouldn't pretend otherwise. This encounter revealed something deeper than just a misunderstanding over a drink. The real issue here is trust, or rather, the complete lack of it. Will's immediate suspicion shows just how deeply past conflicts have shaped his perception of Dylan, even when logic suggests an innocent explanation. Old wounds make it impossible to assume the best. For Dylan, the moment is equally revealing. He doesn't explode in anger or walk away. Instead, he remains calm and tries to help Will through the situation. The reaction hints that Dylan might be trying to move beyond the past, even if Will isn't ready yet. But in generosity, unresolved history rarely stays quiet for long. The tension between these two men may have temporarily cooled, but it's far from over. And as rumors about the incident begin circulating, the situation could easily spiral into something much bigger. Personally, this moment feels like the calm before a much larger storm. Will's suspicion may have been wrong this time, but the fact that he jumps to the conclusion so quickly says a lot about their relationship. When trust is broken deeply enough, even the smallest situation can trigger fear and confrontation. What makes the scene powerful is how realistic it feels. Sometimes conflicts aren't resolved with dramatic revelations. Sometimes they end quietly, leaving both people wondering if things will ever truly be different. And honestly, that unresolved tension is exactly what makes stories like this so gripping. Now, the big question is what happens next? Will this moment actually open the door for Will and Dylan to rebuild some level of trust? Or will the rumors spreading across generosity create even more conflict between them? And here's the real question I want you to answer in the comments. If you were in Will's position, would you have trusted Dylan or would you have suspected the same thing? Let me know your thoughts below. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next dramatic twist.